Let's do this. The Cult of Hockey podcast by the faithful and for the faithful. I'm David Staples of the Edmonton Journal, and I'm here today with Bruce McCurdy. Welcome, Bruce.
Hey, David. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm all right, thanks. Another beautiful day.
Yeah, it is. It was very nice yesterday. It's supposed to even be nicer today. So, Bruce, there's not a ton of Oilers news per se. This is the time of year, which usually is like what is it? Mid-May, late May. We're getting towards
Yeah,
late May. In
yeah,
the regular hockey season, when teams would be starting to looking at making moves in a couple of weeks once the Stanley Cup
right.
finals are over, essentially. So that's where the Oilers are, and that's where I think we are both looking at the team and trying to figure out. Fans are doing the same thing, and actually, um, I had a poll about that. Before I get into any of that, though, Bruce, there was a number of people who brought up an issue of lots of ads running during this podcast on YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
There's a big discussion thread on this. I can say that I talked to my editor. He's looking into why there were so many ads. Obviously, you have an ad every couple of minutes. That's not something that we want. And I don't think it's actually the preliminary finding may be that this has nothing to do with the Journal. This may be a YouTube
Right.
issue where they're inserting the ads, and they do it to lots of videos. And if you don't have the YouTube Premium service, you have to watch all these ads. Nonetheless, it was excessive. So we're trying to get to the bottom of it and see what's happening. Like if you do just want to listen to the podcast, you can
Right.
listen to it's on Apple and Google Play, and you can just listen straight through. You, of course, you can't see us, which is another
Oh
benefit
well.
of doing it that way. Okay.
No,
So
I
we
audit
listen.
I
We're
audit our
not happy.
podcasts.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we're not happy about that. This
of course not.
broadcast being brought up by ads, but we are as in the dark as anyone. We're trying to get some answers, and I don't know if the problem will be resolved or not. Maybe it was a one-time thing. Bruce, today we're going to talk about some of the things Holland's talking about, got to be thinking about. Big trades. What is he going to do with Athanasiou? Well, what is he going to do with Kris Russell? And what is he going to do with the top 4D with Puljujarvi, which we've touched on in the past? We'll get into that. What's he going to do in net? In Let's just start with Athanasiou. I'll have to look up the poll as we're talking that I did on this issue because fans weighed in on this. And anyway, I did a kind of a look at Andreas Athanasiou, and this was spurred on. There's lots of talk right now, Bruce, about the Oilers maybe making a play for Jake DeBrusk of the
Oh
Boston
yeah.
Bruins, which I think is personally, I think it's completely unrealistic. I suspect that if there's rumors about this, maybe it's DeBrusk's agent trying to drive up DeBrusk's price in Boston. That this doesn't have the air of reality to it that he would come here. Like, what are the Oilers going to do? Trade what to get Jake DeBrusk? But the interesting thing, Bruce, is over the last 2 years, if you look at even strength scoring, so that's not, get rid of the power play, essentially, Andreas Athanasiou and Jake DeBrusk have almost identical levels of even strength scoring last 2 years. Almost exactly. They're at like 1.9 points per 60, which is a pretty good level for a winger, though not a great level. A great level is like 2 and above, 2 points per 60 and above. Get to 3 points per 60 and above, you're a superstar. So they're at 1.9. And I think if you said right now, well, the Oilers could get Tyler Johnson or Tyler Toffoli or Jake DeBrusk and pay $3 million a year, most Oiler fans would be doing a handstand. They would be so happy to hear that
Right.
they could get one of those players for $3 million a year. And but the fact is, those players all have essentially equal or less even strength scoring to Athanasiou over the last 2 years. Now, I understand that's just one way of rating them. That's just looking essentially at offensive ability, but I think it's a
Mm-hmm.
pretty good measure of offensive ability. And it also the other problem would be that's over 2 years, and when you look at Athanasiou and these other players more recently, Athanasiou is a cut below the other guys. He's at 1.5 points per 60, and the other guys are at like 1.8 for DeBrusk and 2.2 for Toffoli, 1.8 for Johnson, I think, just this last year. So if you just look at this
Right.
last year, Athanasiou doesn't look as good. But the thing that got me thinking, Bruce, he's only 26. What you're really worried about in terms of drops of scoring is that a player has been injured or he's getting old and can't keep up the scoring rate. And what you don't want to be swayed by is a player who has an off year in terms of scoring. And maybe that's just Athanasiou just had a bit of an off year. He's a more reliable scorer than that. And he's not a bad bet in the end, even at $3 million for next year. So this isn't an easy question to answer. You have to think, who is the real Andreas Athanasiou, the one who scored 30 goals 2 years ago, or the one who got 11 goals this year, essentially? Right. But he's only 26.
Mm-hmm.
I have more to say on the player, but what do you think so far? What are your thoughts?
Well, he was a big disappointment, I think, in terms of what they paid for, the next 2 second-round draft picks. I mean, if you think back, the last 2 second-round draft picks, the Oilers got Ryan McLeod and Raphael Lavoie, who are 2 of the top forward prospects in the organization. That's a pretty steep price to have to pay for a guy who comes in and makes as little impact as he made in a short time. I think in retrospect, we can step back and say he just had a real bad season in 2019-20. And even with a several-month break, he wasn't able to turn that around in the playoffs, which isn't a good sign. But the year before, he was a 30-goal scorer in the National Hockey League, playing on a pretty poor team in Detroit. And you know what? He wasn't like playing with the top players in Detroit. His most common line mate the last 2 years was Luke Glendening, right?
Is that right?
He played with Tyler Bertuzzi a fair little bit, about 6 hours, but he played with Franz Nielsen, Valtteri Filppula, Darren Helm, and then you have to go way down to like 200 minutes or so before you get to guys like Anthony Mantha, Thomas Vanek, Dylan Larkin. So he wasn't playing a lot with Detroit's first-line players. And I think that speaks to what kind of player he is. In Detroit, he was seen as a guy that maybe is best as a driver on a lower line, as opposed to a guy that, plays well with others, as Lowtide likes to put it, from the old report card comment. And maybe that's what we saw in Edmonton, was that he had some fairly effective moments against Chicago when he was on the third line, and he was the guy taking the puck and driving the blue line, taking it wide and challenging the defenseman. And that's not necessarily what you want to see a winger do when he's on a line with Connor McDavid or Leon Draisaitl. So in some ways, it's kind of self-limiting on what the expectations can be from the player. On the other hand, a guy who can drive offense from a bottom 6 is a valuable commodity.
Yeah, if he's getting, let's say, 1.9 points per 60 as a third-line winger, I can see paying $3 million. And now, of course, that's just his offense. And there was, I think,
Right.
both statistical. There was a statistical information that something's really wrong with his two-way game. The minus whatever he was, minus 5,020. Yeah, what was it? Minus 46 this year.
Yep, on the green jacket, biggest
yeah.
minus in the NHL.
So, and listen, there was also visual, like just watching him in the playoffs, Bruce. He just seemed, at least when he got put up with Draisaitl and Yamamoto, his forecheck, he just seemed lost. But you know what? I liked him until then. When he was on the third line in the playoffs against Chicago, I was thinking, oh, he's looking good, this guy. So I think that's a really interesting thing. I don't think he works at all with give and go players who play well with each other. That's not his game. He's not a high IQ offensive hockey player. He's a get the puck and go hard to the net offensive hockey player. And maybe that's what he is for the Oilers next year. Have him on a third line with, maybe with Gaetan Haas as the center and Josh Archibald as the winger. And that's kind of just a line that just gets on the horse and rides as hard as they can for 60 seconds and gets off the ice. But maybe you get 20, 25 goals out of Athanasiou in that role, which would be probably worth that kind of money. So I'm not averse to him. I'm not averse, like if Holland was to qualify him, I wouldn't be pulling out my hair, my whatever hair I have, that this was a bad move. This isn't necessarily a terrible move, because the guy can put up points. There is also a chance, Bruce, that he could play with McDavid, who is not an easy player to play with, who doesn't necessarily need to play with other give and go players, but maybe someone who takes the puck hard to the net could work with McDavid, or who could go hard to the net. Like a slight alteration on Athanasiou's game might work with McDavid. I'm not so convinced of that. I'm not pushing that, but if he is just, as you say, like this third line winger who can score some, that's a very valuable player. I do want to get into the last point I'll make is the 2 second-round draft picks,
Right.
which is a confounding factor for Holland, because for him to not to qualify Athanasiou on some level is to admit that he made a mistake in giving 2 second-round draft picks, which will be very hard for Holland to do. Right? It's essentially an admission. Hey, I didn't get this right, but this is the sunk cost fallacy, which I refer to in my post, where the 2 draft picks, they're gone.
Right.
And compounding that with giving him a contract that he doesn't deserve, if he doesn't deserve it, doesn't make that better, doesn't bring back those picks. It actually makes it worse. If that's part of your motivation, is to prove that you were right in trading those picks. So Holland has to forget the sunk cost on Athanasiou and just look, what is the best decision? And in the end, Bruce, I think the best decision, given that Athanasiou, I think, is unlikely to accept a lower contract right now, which is the rumor, like the Oilers are going to make a lower bid for him below his contract price of $3 million, that they can qualify him at. They might give him like $2.2 million. I think it's unlikely, not impossible, but unlikely Athanasiou will accept that.
Right.
So what might have to happen is he'll have to go on the market, see what's out there, see if he can get more, and if he can't, then maybe he and the Oilers then will come to some kind of conclusion. And when I look at this market of teams having low revenue, teams needing to, first of all, teams having low revenue, tons of uncertainty, lots of teams wanting to cut costs because their owners have lost a lot of money, a flat salary cap. I think that the thing to do in this market is not to be first in, but to wait, because there's going to be lots of bargain players, equivalent to a Tyler Ennis, I think, in this market, who might give you close to what Athanasiou will give you if it's not him. And this market will reward the patient. So maybe be patient with Athanasiou. Don't qualify him. Indicate you want to sign him, but maybe he's got to test the market first.
Yeah, well, I think the low ball offer is the play at this point. With the which we now know free agency opens on October the 9th, I believe it is. So we're a month away from that. So presumably the qualifying offers there'll be some deadline just before the draft, probably October 4th or 5th, something like that, for the qualifying offers to be made, where we know about these restricted free agents. Now, in the case of Athanasiou, a further complicating offer is they could make a qualifying offer, and he could then file for arbitration, and because he's at that status, and with that 30-goal season in his past and 18, 16-goal seasons before that, who knows what the arbitrator might rule.
Could the Oilers walk away from that?
There was a certain price point, and I've forgotten exactly what that is. He would probably be very close to that, where the team could just walk away from the arbitration. But that too is, kind of a stinging loss as well, where you've, basically given up on those picks. I guess one course of action is you try and trade his rights to another team looking for offense on the wings, and maybe try and recoup one of those 2 second-round picks. I'm not sure you'd have a prayer of getting them both.
You would.
No, but you might be able to get one.
Do you think a team would trade for him?
For his rights? I mean, he's a 26-year-old former 30-goal scorer with tremendous blazing speed. Like, there's reason to like the guy. Whether, I think the team would rather trade for a signed player. But sometimes when you get to a place where you're not going to sign him, you see these players get, their rights get moved to some other team, and something recouped for him. So
maybe a team like Ottawa or Florida, who's going to lose, like these low revenue teams who are looking for top line wingers, and don't have a lot of them. Like, let's say Florida loses Hoffman to free agency, or Ottawa, who just needs players, or New Jersey, who needs players. they might, and they, they're kind of a budget team. They might think, well, this could be our second or top line winger.
Mm-hmm.
So that team might think, okay, I'll trade a second round pick for him and qualify him.
Especially a team like Ottawa that has about 1 million picks in the top 3 rounds. That
Montreal
for players, yeah. So there is some of that.
Yeah.
I mean, he would have different degrees of interest for different types of teams too. But I read your post and I thought, the idea of them qualifying him at just, the exact same figure. Like, I honestly don't think, because of how poor his last season was, that he has much of a case for a big raise. And uh, ultimately, it may just become a waiting game where the Oilers offer him 2+ million, and he'll say, no, my qualifying offer is 3. Let's wait until the deadline. Either you qualify me or you don't. And if you don't, I'm free to look around. Once you get to that stage, the likelihood of him circling back to Edmonton is actually not that great, I wouldn't think.
I agree, Bruce. Yeah, that's unlikely. At that point, the benefit of waiting, of course, is then you can also wait on these other teams to see if one of them does get interested in giving a second round pick or a third round pick for Athanasiou, which is I could see a third round pick being quite likely, actually. If they can get a second, if they can get a second back, then it's actually, you paid a second to take gamble on Athanasiou this year, and the other second you were giving was because you could qualify him at $3 million and think he might be worth that. So if they can get a second pick, I think that's the trade actually has worked out for the Oilers at that point. I'm skeptical that they will get a second round pick for Athanasiou which would indicate to me that they shouldn't qualify him, if that's his value. So I'm just really on the fence, but his even strength scoring over the last 2 years, in comparison to these other wingers, did give me pause. Like, why are we so excited about? Are these, maybe they're much better defensive players, Johnson, DeBrusk, and Toffoli, than Athanasiou. Maybe they are. Maybe they would fit in much better with Connor McDavid, which is another possibility. But the results in terms of scoring are very, very similar. So I put a lot of weight in that, actually. Points per 68 at even strength, I think, is quite a useful stat in rating offensive play over time. So, Bruce, you took a look you're comparing the Oilers to various teams and that are in the playoffs and still doing well. And a common denominator seems to be that these other teams have done a much better job on day 2 of the draft at finding talent than the Edmonton Oilers. The Edmonton Oilers have been for years, until and maybe just the exception of 2015, when they got Caleb Jones, Ethan Bear, and John Marino in the second day. The Oilers have been exceptionally bad in that regard, and other teams that are advancing in the playoffs this year have been either or good or exceptionally good at that. What was the latest comparison that you looked at?
Okay, yeah, so I'm looking at the 4 conference finalists that are all now in Edmonton, one of whom is going to win the Stanley Cup. And one of each of the teams is built remarkably differently. They each have a totally different approach. There's different pathways to success in the National Hockey League. It's not just one blueprint that works for everyone. But one common theme, as you pointed out, is that all of these teams have built important players in the second day of the draft, with the exception of Vegas Golden Knights, which are a completely different animal altogether. And that's the team I'm going to be covering last, because they were all built through the expansion draft and deals around it. But in the case of, Tampa Bay Lightning, all these guys were drafted on day 2. Nikita Kucherov, Anthony Cirelli, Alex Killorn, Braden Point, Cedric Paquette, Andre Palat. I mean, that's 2 big-time superstars and some excellent two-way players. Palat's a big scorer for them, taken 208th overall. When I looked at New York Islanders on day 2, they got Casey Cizikas, Anders Lee, Scott Mayfield, Adam Pelech, Devin Taves, 3 top 4 defensemen on that team, all cheap defensemen making under $2 million a season. That they drafted, 2012, 2014. that they were able to pick up these guys, and also even Matt Martin that they got as a fifth round pick. He did leave the team and he came back, so I've listed him as, they got him by trade, but really he's been an Islander for many, many years. And they have this kind of team continuity on New York, first round draft picks as well. Josh Bailey, Brock Nelson, 30th overall, so very last pick of the first round. So a very similar category of player that they were able to, those guys have been the face of that team for years. And I've had a constant complaint that the Oilers have not kept their interior, not just their star players, but their kind of depth and core players. You look at these teams, you look at second line, third line guys. They've got players that have been kicking around for years that are associated with that team. And then today I'm rating on Dallas. And in rounds 2 through 7, second day of the draft, they got Jamie Benn, Rupi Hintz, 2 forwards, and key defensemen John Klingberg and Esa Lindell. So here now is finally a sparkle of hope for the Oilers. John Klingberg and Esa Lindell are both like big time important defensemen for the Stars. But you know what? It wasn't until the draft plus 5 season that John Klingberg made an impact in the NHL. And it wasn't until his draft plus 5 season that Esa Lindell made his impact in the NHL. They were both picked, 131 overall, 74 overall. So they're not big. It takes these guys time. And they have exact parallels on Edmonton and Caleb Jones and Ethan Bear, both of whom made the NHL this year in their draft plus 5 season. Obviously, they're years behind. They made good chance they're not as good as Klingberg and Lindell, who are terrific players, but there's room for growth there. And there's sort of, here's a parallel. They're just behind the curve because for so many years, the Oilers got nothing out of day 2 of the draft. And, only like this year, 2 rookies, and Jujhar Khaira is sort of their only holdover player that they've had for a while. That was a picked on the second day of the draft. And you compare that to the lists I just gave you for all of these other teams that are in the Stanley Cup semifinals, and it's just a gaping void on the Oilers' resume. And unfortunately, that's not a problem you fix overnight. It takes a long time.
I note that on the Dallas Stars defense in their top 4 is Jamie Oleksiak, Bruce.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, first round draft pick. They waited for him for a long time.
And he went to Pittsburgh for a while, too. I got in trouble years ago for suggesting that the Oilers should trade their first pick, who turned out to be Darnell Nurse, and Sam Gagner, who had a big kind of messy contract at the time, for Jamie Oleksiak. Mm-hmm. And for a long time, and the fair analysis of my suggestion there was it was a bad suggestion then. It is interesting that with these bigger players, these huge lanky guys, sometimes it does take a long time for it to come together for them. But I do think that's happened finally with Oleksiak, who looked awfully good as a 19-year-old in the AHL, but took some time to develop in the NHL. Yeah, Bruce, it's so disappointing. Like, and again, because we're old-timey fans, we grew up in the Barry Fraser era, which was this kind of miracle run of drafting. Not only were the Oilers gifted with the miracle of Wayne Gretzky, but they were gifted with the miracle years of drafting that Barry Fraser had, where he found Hall of Fame players regularly in the later rounds of the draft, like Mark Messier, Yari Curry, and Glenn Anderson, just an amazing Esa Tikkanen. It was just, and so for us to be the worst or one of the worst, it's just really disappointing. The Oilers drafting, under Stu McGregor and Kevin Prendergast and Barry Fraser. And, it looked like it was turning around a bit with Bob Green in charge there. He had a pretty good year, I believe, that first year. Mm-hmm. And Keith Gretzky. Now we'll see how Tyler Wright did. Tyler Wright didn't kill it in Detroit. So we'll see how this goes, but it's absolutely crucial. It's the Detroit Red Wings, as Ken Holland knows, was built on great drafting, but that ended in the last decade of Ken Holland's time in Detroit. They didn't have great drafting. He kept around the same old scouts, and he got the poor results in that last decade. So we'll see how it goes, Bruce. The thing about Caleb Jones, you raised him as a player. I think in the modern NHL, you also do have to make room for players. And if the Oilers can't move Kris Russell this year, and we'll talk about that in a second, I think they're going to have to move either Nurse. I believe they should move either Nurse or Klefbom to make room for Caleb Jones if they can't move Kris Russell. And I don't think Jones, in terms of his even strength performance, will be much worse than either Jones or either Klefbom or Nurse, and he might be better. And with the rumors that Brian Lawton has made, I should say, about seeing top four D-men move from the Oilers, I do think Ken Holland really is thinking about moving Oscar Klefbom for a top winger. And there's a number of players who are out there who might make sense in terms of that. There's Nikolai Ehlers from Winnipeg. There's Max Domi from Montreal. There's Johnny Gaudreau from Calgary, who I don't think they're going to get. He would cost too much as well. Ehlers might as well. There's free agent Taylor Hall. There's Brett Connolly from Florida, who's a slightly lower price point, but in the last 2 years, he's averaged 2.2 points per 60 at even strength. Ehlers is at 2.5, and Gaudreau is at 2.7. So I don't think it's out of the question that the Oilers, we might be hit with a kind of a blockbuster kind of trade here. And I don't know if Klefbom has that kind of value to bring back that kind of player or not. Certainly not Gaudreau. Maybe he would be the main piece, though, in a trade for one of those other guys.
Well, he's got a lot of value for the reason that his contract is pretty favorable. You know, for a guy that plays 25 minutes a night, to be coming in at anything under $5 million a year and locked up for 3 years, there's a lot of value there. And for that reason, I'm pretty loath to the idea of trading the guy. On the other hand, I mean, what you say about making room is true. I mean, ideally, Caleb Jones comes in on the third pairing and maybe fills in the top four if someone gets hurt for a while, as opposed to saying he's ready for top four duty. He did show promise when he filled in for Klefbom when Oscar was hurt there, and the Oilers were able to tread water during that time. Without Oscar, but as you say, the perfect world solution is they move on from the last year of Kris Russell's contract. They use the cheat code that is Daryl Cates' deep pockets, and they take advantage of the fact that $2.5 million of Russell's $4 million cap hit is prepaid, and they move on from the cap hit and create space that way. And then the same move, not just create cap space, but create a space in the top six for Caleb Jones. And so that's a move that would have a double benefit to the Oilers if they were able to pull it off.
That's why I call it the alpha move for Ken Holland this summer, is trading Kris Russell. I think it's if he can pull that off without taking a poison pill back, you've had a successful summer, just like trading Lucic was last summer. And I know that there's, you're reconsidering the Lucic trade yourself.
I know, because they got so much crap back in return,
They did, but they got rid of him.
They got a big contract. They lost a draft pick. They lost cap retention. We've been through it, but they gave up a lot to move on from that one.
I think they can. My prediction is they will be able to move Kris Russell. So he has to give them a list of 15 teams that he can be traded to, and but there's two factors, Bruce, that make me think they can move the guy. First of all, he's a good player still, especially a good defensive player. So if you're looking for, what do you got going on there, man?
Just
the cat issue or something crashing around there in the background. So I'll just wait till you're back, Bruce. Putting on the headphones, searching for the headphones on. There we go. So as I was saying, there's a few factors that make me think they can trade Russell. He's a very good defensive hockey player. He's a veteran player. He's still got some game left. And I, to the point where if he was back on the Oilers as your third pairing left D man, he's expensive for your cap hit, but he still can help you win. I think good penalty killer, as a third pairing guy, and maybe on some teams as a caddy for a more kind of offensive defenseman in the top four. I think Kris Russell can still play. So I was looking at teams that have both let in a lot of goals last year, so might be looking for that kind of solid defensive player, and also low revenue teams that didn't pull in a lot of money last year, and might be looking for someone who's got a high cap hit but much lower salary. So with Russell, that's just $1.5 million left to pay for him this year. Right. He's already had a $1 million signing bonus. So the teams that popped out, Florida and Ottawa, which are weaker teams. Now, Russell might want to go to Florida. You could see him thinking, yeah, maybe Florida. I don't know if he'd want to go to Ottawa. There's also Anaheim, lower revenue team that let in a lot of goals. There is Buffalo, which I don't know if he'd want to go to Buffalo, let in a lot of goals, lower revenue team. There's San Jose, which is kind of a middle revenue team, but let in a lot of goals. San Jose, that I'm thinking maybe San Jose might, Kris Russell and Mrs. Russell. I don't know if there's a Mrs. Russell, but they might be thinking,
there is
San Jose.
They had a baby during the season.
There you go. Nashville, that's another team in this kind of middle of the rung in terms of revenue, but actually letting quite a bit of goals this year. Nashville did. So Anaheim, Nashville, San Jose. Those would be the three. Those would be the teams that I'd be thinking maybe. And then there's in Canada, there's Calgary and Winnipeg. You can see I think he lives equidistant between I think his ranch is equidistant between Calgary and Edmonton. So, and then there's Winnipeg, which is further off, obviously. But so the benefit to Russell is in Edmonton, if they don't trade him, Jones should play ahead of him anyway. He's the seventh D man, and we've talked about this before. If Kris Russell might be thinking, hey, I got a lot of hockey left in me. I just don't want to play one more year. I want to play 3 more years.
Yeah.
I want to keep going. And he may be thinking that, although having blocked as many shots as he has over the years, maybe he's not thinking that. But maybe he is, and he might be thinking, I want to go to a team where I'm going to be in the top 4 or at least be assured of steady ice time in the bottom ring. And that's probably not going to be Edmonton. So he may be actually open to moving to some of these places. So I think that they'll be able to work a trade. What do you say?
Well, his list has only got 15 teams on it, right, that it can't be traded on. So, I mean, that does give Holland 15 other teams to talk to directly without needing permission.
Yeah.
And I go back to the fact that if he finds a good fit from the organization standpoint, he then he talks to the player and his agent and says, well, this is, let's say they work out something with Arizona. That's what I'm looking at is Arizona. Say Arizona's on Russell's no-fly list. But if he works something out there and say, well, Arizona, they just moved on from 3 high-end defensemen. They need veteran leadership. They got things going on there, and they're looking for a veteran who might be able to help them out for not just this year, but a couple of years beyond. And just to talk about the options. And one of those options is you're going to spend a lot of time in the press box in Edmonton, Kris, the way things are shaping up. And that's not going to help your bargaining power down the road now, is it? And it may well be that's the theory. And then, of course, once the game starts, somebody gets hurt, and then he's out of the press box, and we're back into situation as normal. But I do think there's room. We're talking about a mature player here, and honestly, for all the flack that he takes from the fan base, Kris Russell has never caused the Oilers 1 second of negative publicity. He's been a consummate pro to my view. He's not my favorite player, but I respect him as a professional. And when laid out with the options, he and at the end of their careers, lots of players, move around and find a place where they fit. So he and his wife, I think she kept her maiden name. I think her name is Caroline Cowboy. Could be
Carolyn
mistaken.
Cowboy, did you say? Oh, sorry. A little thick there for a second.
Penny drops. Yeah. Anyway, I don't think it's as insuperable a problem as some make it out to be, that he's deliberately picking a list of teams that would be the only ones that could possibly trade him to force Edmonton to keep him, because that's what kind of a guy Kris Russell really is. I don't see that. And I think there's a pretty reasonable chance. And like I say, the Arizona situation, that's the volatile one where, if you offer, uh, I'm just blue skying here. The Oilers don't have draft choices to offer Arizona, which they're looking for, but they do have prospects and they do have defense prospects. And let's say Arizona is in a situation where they're moving on from Goligoski and Demers and so on, and they're looking to get to the cap floor without spending a lot of money. But you throw at them Kris Russell and a good defense prospect like, say, Dmitry Samorukov, and you ask for Darcy Kuemper, and see what happens.
Ooh. No, of course, that's a trade the Oilers would jump all over, I think, in a second.
Well, maybe Arizona will with their new circumstance. They're clearly changing gears. They got rid of their GM. They got in trouble with the league. They lost draft choices, and they're looking clearly to do a reset, near as I can tell.
Yeah, so. I think you're going to need a draft pick to get Darcy Kuemper, personally.
But Dmitry Samorukov was a pretty good draft pick who's developing, into.
Yeah.
So, picks or prospects, but it's going to have to be a good prospect. You're not going to throw in a third-tier prospect and call it a day. It's going to be someone with serious upside.
Arizona was one of the best defensive teams in terms of goals against average last year, but Brian Lawton indicated, according to his advanced analytics, that had a lot to do with heroic goaltending, which would have come from all three of the goalies had pretty good save percentages. So maybe they just had three really good goalies there. But they are looking at trading. We have heard rumors of them looking to trade Ekman Larsson, Goligoski, Hjalmarsson, Demers. So you're right, Bruce. That's a real possibility for Russell. And so my prediction is he will be traded this summer. I made a similar prediction last year with Lucic that he would be traded. I'm 1-for-1 on this kind of prediction. So we'll see if we'll keep track of this, Bruce, and see if I get this right. What do you think? Do you think he will be traded or not?
Well, 1 year Kris Russell at $4 million cap hit and much lower contract is an easier sell than 4 years of Milan Lucic's 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. So I think it's a safer bet. I'm still kind of shocked they moved the Lucic deal, even at the price they paid. But I think it's a pretty good bet, and I just think we're at that point. I mean, when you step back and look at Kris Russell's contract, to me it was a 3-year deal at $4.5 million, and they tagged on the 4th year with the extra signing bonus and the much lower rate, with the idea of being, okay, you want the security of a 4th year, then it's diminishing returns. It will bring down our cap hit by $500,000 a year to add that 4th year. But by the time that contract is in the home stretch, there's no guarantees that you're still going to be an Oiler, and they gave him 3 years here in addition to the one when he originally signed the 1-year deal. He's been an Oiler for 4 years now, and this is a player who's on his 5th NHL team right now, so he knows the lay of the land. And I think I would bet 60-40 that he's moving.
It's interesting. Okay. He is 33. He's earned a lot of money over the years. He's already been paid $1.5 million, right? His signing bonus this year. With the clawback, the various clawbacks are going to happen on that $1.5 million. It's going to be a lot less.
Right.
There's not. I'd say there's a non-zero chance, like greater than a non-zero. How do you phrase that? A non-zero chance that he will retire. It's a possibility, with COVID going on, and we just don't know. What we've seen, I think, with some of the older players who've made a lot of money is, do they really want to endure an NHL season, maybe played in a bubble? But I'm just speculating completely. I have no idea what Russell's mind's, and it's just as likely that he wants to play many more years, or probably more likely.
I think he wants to play hockey. He lives to play hockey, is the impression I get.
I really like him as a hockey player, if I'm completely honest. I love his defensive play. I love him on the PK. I like him even as on the left side of the defense. I just can't take it anymore on the right side, with him playing there. And I just thought it was a bad move by Tippett to insert him on the right side in the playoffs. but that's on the coach. It's not on the player.
Well, Larson getting hurt didn't help matters any, because
put Jones
they
in.
had to put someone on the right side. But
yeah, I would have put Jones.
There were other options.
Yeah, I would have played Jones right from the top, but we've already been through that. My various critiques of the coaching. Bruce, the last thing on our list is just a real the Oilers have found homes now for Bouchard and Gaetan Haas in Europe, and Bouchard's going to the second division in Sweden, and Haas is going back to his old team in Switzerland. And I have to say, I was thrilled with both moves. I just think it's essential that Bouchard keep playing. I was glad to see Haas keep playing. Bouchard he's got to keep developing, and he's on the right track right now. This is just a really good move. He's going to a team where they need, I don't know how to pronounce it, Sodert Ollie or something. Where they're looking, they don't. This is a cut below. So if the Finnish league and the Swedish league are essentially the equivalent of the AHL, and I think they're close enough to say that this would be a decided cut below that. So Bouchard should be the best player, most talented player on the team. Even if he doesn't get a ton of ice time, because he's there for a short time, not a long time. I just like that he's going to be practicing playing. He's going to experience a whole other hockey system, whole other world of hockey. He's just going to. I think it's going to be healthy for this player's development to go through this, and excited to see it. And what I'm hoping now is, and I don't know if Ken Holland is the one parking, who was able to set this up because of his contacts in Sweden, park Bouchard over there. But I'd love to see Tyler Benson and Cooper Marody follow, because we've already seen Samorukov, Maximov, and McLeod get placed in European leagues. And I hope Holland has the connections to get Benson and Marody over there if they're open to that.
Yeah, I mean, the Oilers have done a tremendous job, really, at this point, placing of their top 15 prospects. I've lost count, but it must be around 10 by now that have a second home in Europe. Either for the whole season, or at least for the first opening months, which the Bouchard deal actually gives the team the option of bringing him back for training camp. Same, of course, with Haas and Nygaard, the two actual NHLers who are loaned over there. But with some of the players, they had to make commitments for the entire season. But most of them are prospects that weren't really in the plans for the Oilers in 2021 in any event. So it was just sharp business practice by me, and the fact they were able to not just get their European-born prospects playing back in their native countries, but now they've been able to find homes for both Raphael Lavoie and Evan Bouchard with Lavoie. Yeah, right, three of them. So yeah, they've got all kinds of opportunity for the young guys to play, and for their still developing guys, which, I mean, Nygaard and Haas, it's not going to be a new situation for them, but it's going to be a way for them to get themselves into top shape and ready to come over and take camp by storm at such time as it happens.
Really like it, Bruce, and they will. Like, remember the year of the lockout, when those players from Oklahoma City got in the NHL, they had a pretty good start. Nugent Hopkins, Hall, Eberle, Schultz. They had been playing all the time in the AHL, and they were just really ready to go when the NHL seasons finally started during the last lockout year. So, and again, if they can place Benson and Marody, and I think Skinner would be the last guy, the goalie, that might be a little harder. Goalies are always a little bit hard to deal with. Sure. But if they can move any of those guys, that'd be I'll be open to that. So, Bruce, the last little controversy that we'll deal with is Puljujarvi. And I made an argument in the last podcast based on his performance with McDavid that he actually, the big criticism of Puljujarvi is that he's not earned it. He hasn't earned playing with McDavid. But I would, my argument was, well, actually, if you look at his numbers with McDavid, he had, those two guys had more success if you look at goals for plus minus than any other combination McDavid's had since he got to the Oilers. Is that kind of not earning it? Now, on the other hand, if you look at Puljujarvi's scoring in his last year at Edmonton, Bruce, and we just talked about Athanasiou being at 1.9 per 60. Puljujarvi was at 0.9 per 60. It's absolutely atrocious level of scoring. So the people who are saying he hasn't earned it, that's what they're looking at. Like, just like, this guy came to the NHL, he didn't put up points at all. Now, I would say he was hurt that year. He played with Milan Lucic a lot of the time. There was just no chemistry there, and there was extenuating circumstances. And when you put him with a player who could play like McDavid, he did very well. And, I don't know how many goals he scored today in the Finnish league, but the last time I looked, it was 2. I think they're into the regular season now. So some people aren't thrilled. They say this is in the Finnish league, not a great league. It's pretty close when you look at NHL equivalencies. Pretty close to the American Hockey League is the truth.
Yeah.
So it's a pretty good league. And but Bruce, what I'm getting when I add it all up, when I listen to people like Mark Spector, Bob Stauffer, Kurt Levins, who are in the you gotta earn it camp, is a strong. It's never quite said out in the open. But what I'm gathering from the remarks when I put them all together is Puljujarvi ticked off his teammates in Edmonton. There was something about his maturity, his effort level, the way he played the game. They just didn't think he was ready for the NHL, and they didn't like his attitude. And that's kind of when I put it all together. Like, well, McDavid, if he wanted to play with Puljujarvi, he would have asked, and that never happened. So, there's been enough hints through the years. I just think that there was a serious question with the player's maturity level when he was first here, I think is the way I would phrase it. And I take that seriously. I don't think that's a small thing. I think it's a huge thing, actually. So, he did have really great results with McDavid when he was here. He's having great results in Finland. He's a year older. My hope remains, and it seems like an ever fainter hope, that he will come back and get another chance with the Oilers and be a different person. Everyone will be a different person than we were 2 years ago or a year and a half ago, whenever he left. And that will be enough for him to find a role on the Oilers, which I think could be a pretty significant role. That's where I'm left after this whole discussion. What about you?
Well, yeah, it's 18 months now since he played a game here. And, you talk about extenuating circumstance. I mean, I go back to that early in that season where they sent him down in mid-November. They sent him and Kyle Yamamoto out on the same day after both of them ripped it up in the preseason and were supposed to be the answers in the top 6, and they wound up sending them both down to the AHL on the same day. And then they traded Puljujarvi's mentor, Ryan Strome. And then they fired the coach, Todd McClellan, and brought in Ken Hitchcock. And then Ken Hitchcock decided that he was the best man to be the coach for Puljujarvi, and called him right back up to the NHL and stuck him in a bottom 6 role. And it just didn't click at all. I mean, you talk about 0.9 points per 60. Well, like you say, the line mates that he played with for much of that year, the fact that he had physical issues that led to double hip surgery. And I think it was February, the team decided they were going to send him back to the AHL. And at that time, he said, no, I'm going to get my surgery now, because there'd been 2 opinions that both said he needed it. And last year was a nice bounce back year for him in admittedly a league that's about the same level as the AHL, but he was a point per game player in that league, and a dominant, exciting player to highlight reel in that league. It would be nice to see that player with the Oilers without some of the baggage that's accumulated to this point. And I guess the good news is that Peter Chiarelli is gone, Todd McClellan's gone, Ken Hitchcock's gone. Some of the players, though, do remain, and if there's any kind of history of bad blood between them, they're going to have to bury that hatchet before they even begin. And the good news here is that Puljujarvi himself is 18 months older, but so are some of the teammates that he may have been having issues with, and without really having any inside knowledge of that, you'd like to think that there's been some growing up done on all sides of the equation. And in a perfect world, he comes back and helps the Oilers. In an imperfect world, they reach an impasse. And as Ryan Rishaug tweeted yesterday or the day before, that maybe the Oilers really are just going to trade him out for picks. In which case, what do they get for him? A second pick, a second and a third, maybe something like that. I'm not sure. He's a team with several picks in the first round might trade a low-end first-round pick for him. A team like, say, Ottawa, that's trying to, at least jumpstart their recovery. They got all those. I think they got three in the first round. Maybe they trade out the third one to bring in a 22-year-old with a ton of talent who needs a fresh start. And so, maybe there's a fit for a deal of that nature.
I was thinking like you just wait another year with him, like let him like put up 1.5 per game this year in Finland maybe, and see what his value. But I don't see like his value getting much higher than like let's say a second and a third pick for him in terms of draft picks, Bruce. Maybe a low first, but I don't think so. Teams just get all excited about those first round draft picks and maybe a little bit of irrational exuberance about the potential of the players that they could get. They might be wise to trade for Puljujarvi, but when you look at what Nikita Gusev got, a second round pick, he was a top scorer in the KHL, which is a dominant scorer in the KHL for years, and he got a second round draft pick, and when he came over, and I think he put up 2.2 points per game in his first year, per 60 in his first year in the NHL. So I don't see Puljujarvi's value getting much more than a second. So, that's why I've always favored bringing him back to the team. But it seems like that, when you read the tea leaves now, that moment's passed. Perhaps it looked like it might happen, but it's not looking like it's going to happen. You just never know, though. So I'm still fingers crossed that he'll come back. And if he does, I don't think it's incumbent on Dave Tippett that he give Puljujarvi a chance with McDavid, but I do think it would be wise. I think that has he earned it? I mean, that's just a weird way of phrasing it on a certain level. I mean, he had some good results. Let's see if he can replicate those results is how I would put it myself.
Did Ty Ratty deserve a chance on the top line? He got it. I mean, sometimes it's a matter of finding, what's expedient that fits, that's affordable. I mean, unless you want to put your top three salaried players on your first line, anybody else below that, you can say, well, what has he done to deserve it, right? I mean, what did Connor Sherry do to deserve to play with Sidney Crosby? Well, he fit in with them and he produced.
This is where people are talking in code, though, I think, when they're saying, did he earn it? What they're suggesting, I think, is he's actually exhibited behavior which says he should be held back from that because he's not mature enough and he's not enough of a pro to get that chance. He's pissing people off, ticking people off. So that's why he's that's what the issue is. And so that's how I'm taking it. Now maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm reading too much into that. But that's how I see the code being spoken, that there was actually. So with Ty Ratty, did he earn it? Well, what that means is he was enough of a professional that, there was nothing that actually made people angry enough to not give him that job. And maybe with Puljujarvi there was. Does that make sense?
Yeah, there's some baggage there below the water level that we just, all we can do is speculate, and speculating on that kind of stuff is just fraught with peril. I really don't want to go.
Yeah, that's why we go with the numbers.
There's stuff going on. We don't know what it is. It could mount to an insuperable problem that necessitates him being moved. But we can't say that with any kind of authority because we don't have that knowledge.
Yeah, and that's why you and I just tend to go with what we saw on the ice and with the numbers. And with McDavid, it worked actually pretty well, I thought, every time he was with McDavid. I liked that combination. So
I remember a game, David, against Dallas Stars. This is in the Puljujarvi's rookie season, 2016-17. The Oilers had a hot start, and they lost 5 in a row in regulation, and they dropped to, I think it was 9-8 after a really hot start. And they put Puljujarvi with McDavid. They went to Dallas where they were heavy underdogs, and McDavid got a hat trick, and Puljujarvi set up 2 of the 3 goals, and they turned their season around from that point. just clear sailing for them as line mates from then on. But the chemistry and the way they clicked on that night certainly gave the idea that there was some kind of an on ice spark between them that might be something that would work in the longer term.
Yeah, I hear you. We're on the same page, it sounds like, but I don't think I'm not sure about everybody else,
Right.
Especially the people who count. All right, Bruce, thanks for talking today.
All right. Thanks for listening, everyone. Thanks for enduring those commercials.
Yes, hopefully that won't happen. We'll see. We'll check that out. But we're working on it, but there's not necessarily anything we can do about it. And in the meantime, and in between time, this has been another edition of the Cult of Hockey podcast. Let me just find that off button.